Hey everyone, hey Plottr fans, and welcome to Thursdays with Troy. Today, we are normally on Thursdays, we're going to try to do some really cool stuff. We're going to have some demos, some interviews, and stuff like that with people. But today, I'm going to walk you through something actually really cool. So a couple of years ago, actually just before I bought Plottr, I was in a seminar with Dave Farland. By the way, my name is Troy Lambert. For those of you who don't know me, I am the education coordinator at Plottr, and I've been working with them on creating some demos and doing some kind of cool live videos and things like that. And we'll have more of that to come this year. I've written tons and tons and tons of mysteries, and one of the mystery series that I wrote, and I'm still writing, is called the Capital City Murders series. And because it's an ongoing series and it's actually 50 books long, I needed a template for a plot that would work really well. So a couple of years ago, in fact, a couple of days before I bought Plottr, when it was brand new software, I was in a session with Dave Farland at LTUE in Utah. And we were talking about different plot outlines and plot templates. And so at the time, I did a quick search because a lot of people there were working on fantasy and sci-fi and kind of the bigger, broader adventure. And Save the Cat works really well for those. But I wanted something that was along the line of the hero's journey, but was more geared towards mysteries. And so I found something called the Sleuth's Journey. And then I took it and created a template of my own. I modified it and created kind of a template of my own, which I then have modified that further and created a very specific template for the Capital City Murder series. But what I'm going to show you today is that original Sleuth's Journey. So if you're a writer who creates mysteries, or you just want to add some mystery to your plot, this is a potential template that you can use, that instead of following the hero's journey like it normally would, it uses some of the same terms, some of the same type of beats, but it follows the sleuth's journey instead, and it includes some elements that can really deepen your mystery and make them richer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen really quick for that. Of course, feel free to comment. I'll try to answer comments kind of as I go, but I'll have some time at the end for questions as well. So I'm going to share my screen and show you that Sleuth's Journey now. So this is what the Sleuth's Journey looks like. Now, you'll notice that instead of chapters, we have beats. And the reason is, if you have a longer mystery, you may want to, there may be more than one chapter within these beats, depending upon how you construct things, and also depending on how many points of view you tell. Now you'll see there are 15 beats in this particular one. The beauty of this type of template is that you really can modify it to meet your particular needs. So the one that I modified for Capital City Murders actually has 13 beats instead of 15. And this one has 15 plus the introduction, so it's really kind of 16. And depending upon what you're doing in your genre and how you do it, this introduction can also be a prologue. There are certain rules that I recommend that you follow for prologues, and perhaps that'll be another demo for another day. But so this is the essential timeline. Now, the only thing we're going to deal with, when you're coming up with ideas and things like that, you could put them in the notes section. You can even have some standard characters, which I've created, like for Capital City Murders, because my protagonist, for instance, his name is Nick. And so I have created a character for Nick that is in every single one of those books. So when I come to the project, I use the same timeline for every single one of the Capital City Murders books. So, but what this does is, so if you're familiar with the hero's journey, typically what you start with is you start with the hero's ordinary world. And we look at what is their world like from day to day. And so in the sleuth's journey, you start with the sleuth's ordinary world instead. Now you can see when I click into the scene card, that there's a bunch of information here. Where does he live? What's the setting? The intro to James Bond movies or the intro to John Wick, sometimes it introduces us with some action, but it introduces us into this is kind of the normal world of this particular, and I got a misspelling there, for this particular sleuth, whoever your sleuth is. Now, when you're in a series, sometimes this is your reintroduction to the series. This is where you let the readers know this is what this series is about. And maybe in some cases, this is what has happened so far, right? But this is just, you introduce an ordinary world, and then immediately with the call to adventure, we're using the same terminology we would for the hero's journey. Instead, they're essentially hired to solve the crime, or they somehow become involved with the case. So they're drawn into the investigation somehow. Their ordinary world is disrupted. And this is really your inciting incident. Now, there's myriad different ways to do this. So sometimes this beat can be part of the prologue where you introduce what the real crime is in that real world. But really, this is the point where you introduce how the sleuth gets involved with the crime. Okay. But also at the same time, you'll notice that I've added other plot lines down this side. The next one is the victim's timeline. Now, even if your reader doesn't see the victim's point of view, this is the point where the victim's world is disrupted. Now, they're either robbed. If they're killed, obviously their world is disrupted permanently. If they're assaulted, whatever the case may be. But you also want to give your reader in this particular part a reason to care about the victim. If we don't care that the person died, then it's really difficult for us to carry that through to an entire book. So the crime itself, the impact on the victim, and how it actually disrupts their world. Like I say, death kind of does that permanently, but it also disrupts the world of the people around them. So don't forget that part of things. But then also, I have a villain's timeline, because the villain's world is disrupted. And again, even if your reader doesn't see this, it's good for you as the author to know how the villain's world is disrupted. And if the villain's world is disrupted, it's disrupted because they committed a crime. And that normally puts them in a position where they have to cover up the crime. They have to get away with it, that type of thing. Now, in certain types of a mystery crime novel, depending on what POV you're using, and if you're using multiple points of view, the reader probably doesn't know who the villain is at this point. They might, but they don't necessarily know that. But you as the author know that this is the moment at which the villain's world is disrupted as well. And so that helps you in writing the rest of the book. Now, a lot of times, especially novel length, you'll have a B story. And the B story will also be disrupted because the normal part of the B story may be the detective sitting with his wife or out on a date in a new relationship. And the subplot is shown as a part of the sleuth's ordinary world. And that is also disrupted by the crime. So the crime, whatever it is, has a huge disruption ripple effect across all of the different plot lines. And that gives you immediate tension to draw your reader in through the rest of the book. And then we have, the typical refusal to call. Instead, what's the sleuth's journey is the reluctance to take the case. The amateur sleuth feels pulled in to investigate, but doesn't feel qualified. The hero's a detective. He doesn't want the case. Maybe he's afraid he won't be given the case. All those different type of things, right? And actually, so I'll share this template, in a broader sense, so you guys can take a closer look at that. But you'll notice that also this disrupts the B story because the decision to take the case spells the end of the original plan for the B story. So if it's a romance, obviously the romance is disrupted. Maybe his wife doesn't want him to take the case. It jeopardizes the relationship, or it jeopardizes whatever else is happening in the B story and causes a disruption there as well, as soon as the decision is made to basically take the case. So we'll go through the rest of these really quickly, but we basically set the sleuth on the path to take the case, which is crossing the first threshold in the hero's journey. The empathy trigger, this is really important, is we want to have empathy for the victim. So no matter how you do this, as the sleuth is set on the path, basically the sleuth and the reader learn something about the victim that makes them feel for that victim. It serves to the motivation of the sleuth, because one of the things I always talk about with people is that everyone in your mystery stories, in fact, in any story, but especially in a mystery story, needs to have a motive for the various different things that they do. Otherwise, why would they do them? So why would an amateur sleuth get involved in a mystery if they know it's going to cause them problems in their life? Well, this empathy trigger gives them at least a part of that reason that goes beyond just their curiosity about the case, but it pulls the sleuth further in because they've got something personal about it. And so there's then the early try-fail, which is an erroneous conclusion, and the villain is revealed. Usually the villain is revealed even if the reader doesn't know who they are. At least we see this character appear by this point. Otherwise, when you get down to the end of your mystery, it feels kind of like a cheat. Like all of a sudden this person appears and they're the one that did it. And so there's no way that your reader could have figured it out, and you don't want to leave them wanting in that way. So as we move forward, we learn some facts about the suspects. The villain flees or inserts themselves in the investigation sometimes. And usually in this beat 2 is where our sleuth tries to resolve beat, the B story. Either he tries to connect better with his daughter or his love interest or his wife or whatever. And typically the thing that disrupts this try-fail is something to do with your mystery. So your mystery is always the center of these things. The romance, the things like that can be a side of things. But if you're flipping this and you're doing it the other way, you're adding some mystery to your romance. So you're writing, let's say, a romantic suspense. Then this can actually be your primary, can be your romance plot, and the mystery is what adds the conflict to the romance. So it just depends on what you're trying to emphasize. But in this particular demo, I'm assuming that you're wanting to, basically you're writing a mystery and you want a depth of it by adding a B story, but you can certainly flip those things and use this exact same template, because these exact same things are going to happen. Just perhaps your sleuth's motive is going to be a little bit different. And the reason for the conflict is not going to be as related to the mystery as it is going to be related to the romance. So usually at this point, we broaden the investigation in beat 6. The sleuth gets to know some more things about the victim, which also creates more empathy. When we learn about the sleuth's background, then we learn something about the sleuth that's related to the mystery, so that the sleuth has a personal interest in the outcome of the mystery, and that creates this midpoint of the B story. The reason the B story isn't working out is because of the same thing that we learned about the sleuth causes them to empathize more with the case. So in a romance subplot, the sleuth may identify with the victim more because of past relationship, something like that. Or we see some of the fears of the sleuth that are manifested in this midpoint that create tension in the B story. And this kind of helps you avoid, you're kind of in the middle of your story here, and it helps you avoid that sagging middle in mysteries where you're trying to get them from the investigation to the resolution of the investigation. And we need to have something to focus on. And speaking of focus, and this is where in beat 8 things turn around. There's a change of focus and change of the investigation. It becomes evident the sleuth was on the wrong track. Something unexpected happened. The appearance of a second body, death of a major suspect, discovery of more evidence, whatever the case may be. If you're writing kind of a serial killer thriller, this can be another death, or it can be a kidnapping, hostage situation. It can be any variety of things. Now, when we move towards the end, we start to understand the motive for the crime. So the hidden motives are revealed to the detective, and then there's a realization of the real motive that someone had to try to to basically disrupt this person's life. Then the all hope is lost moment in a sleuth's adventure is basically it appears that the criminal is getting away with it. And the criminal, on the other hand, let me scroll this a little bit so you can see those a little bit better. And the solution of the crime seems to be impossible. It seems like it's that moment in the Law and Order episode when they say, well, we lost him when the tails, the person got away. We have no idea where they are or what they're doing. That type of thing. And in that thing too, the villain feels like he's home free. So notice that when your hero's journey, your villain's journey is almost always the opposite. When the villain loses all hope, or when the protagonist, when your detective loses all hope, then the villain gains all the hope that, yes, I'm getting away with it. But then basically the detective realizes I turned the wrong way. He reveals the true path. I have the answer. Then the final reveal is the correct answer. He's got the correct answer to the crime. Usually this is where a chase scene happens. The detective now has figured out who did it. Now he has to go get them. And so that's usually a chase. Then there's the final confrontation. The villain is caught. There's a climax of the B story. And then usually beat 15 is the after the battle. This is, kind of whatever happens next. If you're writing a series, this leads to your next series. The clue to what's next. Or, if you're writing a romance with more of a mystery subplot, this is the final image of resolution. Now, what I wanted to talk about is like one more thing, because this is rather a quick demo, I understand that, is how do I actually use this? So we've got these scene cards here, and that's great, but this is the pattern for my story, but it's not my story itself. So I create my own plot lines down here that are the main plot, the victim, the villain, and the B story. And then as I'm moving along, once I have written my introduction to the detective, let's say, or a crime, and I've written all of my different beats on this timeline. Oops, B2, et cetera. Right, once I have written all those on that timeline, then I delete this one. So before I export these things to Scrivener or Word, I delete all these guides that I have up here. But I'll first go through and create all of mine. So this is how the villain's world is disrupted, only it's mine. It's directly relates to my story. Okay, and then once I have all of the things on the villain's plot line, then I delete the guide that's up above. So all I'm left with is my story down here. Now you could do that differently in that you could open this up, save it as something else, and then just change everything in these as well. But I typically leave the guides until I'm done plotting, in case I want to go back and refer to them, like, what did I mean by that in the introduction or in the call to adventure? I can go back and look at like, oh, this is what was supposed to be happening there. Do I actually have that happening down here in my own main plot? So this is like a super, super quick overview of the sleuth's journey, but it's a way as a mystery writer that you can use the typical beats of a hero's journey, only to create your own. Now, sometimes people say, well, this seems like a lot to happen in a single beat. You can certainly separate that out if you want to. Usually I separate this out when I export this to Scrivener. And let's say there's other parts too, like you might say, well, I want, in this one, there's another way you could do this, the sleuth's ordinary world. You could instead add a box here and say, my sleuth's ordinary world. And then you could delete the top one when you're done. So you could do that as well, or even just leave those guides in there and enter your own. So there's any number of ways you can use these templates, but this is just one of the ways that I happen to use it. But if you're writing mysteries, this is a great kind of pathway to follow. Some of these things, in some cases, like you're writing a shorter mystery, you can delete some of these. You can shorten this up. It just gives you an idea of the beats that you should be using. So that is my summary of the Sleuth journey and how I use it. Are there any questions or comments or anything? I should be able to see your comments. I don't think I can answer them if you type them in, but I think I can see them and answer them on video. And if you don't have any questions, if you have any questions once you watch this, if you watch a replay later or anything like that, feel free to tag me in the comments. Feel free to reach out to me. And I can share this template with you and share in more detail how I use it. And as we go forward through the next year, we'll create some more educational resources with Plottr, including basically some more detailed walkthrough of these various templates and how I would use them to create, my own outline and my own story in real detail. And, then you can look at how you would do that as well. So let me know if you have any questions, if you have any ideas. And I really hope this has been helpful to all of you who either write mysteries or who are wanting to just add a layer of mystery to perhaps whatever genre you happen to be writing. If anybody wants to write detectives in space, I've got some great ideas I'm happy to give you. Anyway, I don't see any questions or comments in the group here. So thank you for tuning in. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next Thursday with some more great stuff. And look forward to talking to you then. And again, let me know if you have any questions. Feel free to tag me, comment, all those different things. And I'll be sure to respond to you. Feel free to reach out anytime. Thanks a lot for tuning in, and we'll talk to you next time. Thanks. Bye.